And so I can say welcome to the first fall episode of IFOW, or actually JFOW, Joint Food Ontology Workshop. And we try once a month to either have a presentation or to discuss issues between different ontology groups involved in the food space. So introductions for me, I'm Damien Dooley. I'm from the Center for Infectious Disease Genomics and One Health at Simon Fraser University. And I am here as sort of the lead food on ontology curator as well. I've had the pleasure of working with many of you over the years, and I'd like to introduce Kai this morning for the topic. So a number of you gotten the email, but I'm going to just say, so Kai is going to present on a draft minimum information standard checklist about food composition data. And this project website is currently on GitHub. He'll show where it is. He's a postdoctoral fellow working for the USDA's Food for Health of People and Environment Laboratory, and he completed his master's degree at the University of Bremen and his PhD at the University of Arizona. His PhD involved using ontologies and related technologies to integrate, harmonize, and analyze large-scale marine microbiome data sets. And in his work at the USDA, he's been creating a novel minimum information standard, which you'll learn all about right now. So with that said, over to you, Kai.
Great, thanks, Damien. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Excellent.
Yeah, perfect.
And I'm going to go ahead and share. Can everyone see my screen as well?
Getting there. Yes.
Nice slide.
All right, awesome. Thank you. All right, I'll go ahead and get started. So thank you for the introduction, Damien. Today, I'll be talking about the development of a novel food minimum information standard for food composition data as part of the work that I'm doing as a postdoc at USDA. Note, I'll soon be hired on as an ORISE. So as of next week, I will no longer be a federal employee, but as of right now, I'm currently still a federal employee for what that's worth. All right, so I'll begin. So what are we talking about? A development of a new minimum information standard for food composition data. I have no financial disclosures. So first of all, let me set the context for what we're going to be discussing today in terms of USDA. So at the United States Department of Agriculture's Food for the Health of People and Environment group, there is a website called Food Data Central that we are hosting. Food Data Central is USDA's comprehensive source of food composition data, which hosts multiple distinct data types. I won't be going too much into detail about this today, but I will give it a very high level, just kind of what some of these data types are and what one could maybe expect from it. There's more information about this on the website, and more will be coming soon in the upcoming October release of the website. But just at a very high level, we have five different data types that include a variety of things, such as the foundation foods, which have the current and ongoing focus of the FDC food composition sampling efforts. And foundation foods really aims to capture the extensive underlying data about a diverse range of basic foods, things that are unprocessed or lightly processed. SR Legacy, another one of our data types, as many people might know, is the historic food composition database for the United States that was developed over many years and maintained over many years. As of 2018, it has been retired, with the focus being shifted to foundation foods. FDC also hosts a variety of other data sets, the FNDDS, an application database for the nutrient values to connect to the What We Eat in America dietary intake component of the National Health and Nutrition Examination Study, as well as some experimental foods, which are kind of one-off data sets, as well as branded foods, which is labeled data. So more information about all of that is available at the website. I highly encourage you to check it all there. If we have time, we can talk more about the details of those, but that's just to kind of set the stage for what is available at the USDA's Food Data Central and the context for why this talk is kind of important, in my opinion. So in terms of the rationale, so we're dealing with food systems. We at the USDA, but also many others around the world. And we recognize that food systems are multidisciplinary. They involve a lot of information from a lot of different disciplines, biology, genetics, et cetera, chemistry. And we need to be able to make our food composition data and other food data work together and kind of avoid things like siloed data. We want to avoid having our data, not be able to work together and actually work towards ways of implementing open data as is kind of mandated by the federal government, as well as assuring transparent and clear open communication about our data. And so the idea with the FDC's current work is to really, with the changes to the organization of FDC, really come about from the idea that we want to better capture the information and variability in the food supply. And we want to be able to collect extensive sample metadata about a variety of factors that might be pertinent to a food, things like its collection date or analytical approaches, but also other environmental metadata or chemical or production metadata, management practices, environmental factors, preservation states. There's a lot of information about food that might be really relevant to capture within a food composition data table to make it be possible for us in the future to be able to better analyze, the potential effects of these environmental or chemical or management practices on our food supply. So this all comes within the general context of the FAIR principles. The FAIR principles, I'm sure as everyone on this call are aware, are about making data be able to work together. So the basic idea of the principles is that we should make our data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. But that also applies, the FAIR principles also apply more generally to vocabularies. A close reading of the FAIR principles paper is actually more about, not more, but it's important, and it's emphasizing in the paper that we actually work towards building the ecosystem for our data in such a way that will help facilitate the interoperation of data by building better systems. And that's why I think a lot of people are on this call today with the Joint Ontology Working Group and others to be able to, discuss how we go about doing this, how we make our data findable, not only to, humans, but also to machine systems, how we make our data accessible when possible. Institutional mandates, such as ours at USDA are to make our data available, but really making it interoperable, being able to work together, that's always the challenge to get to reusability and being able to do things like automate meta-analyses, study replication by pulling similar data from a relevant API. I should, of course, just mention that the FDC page does have an API that can pull data from. We're working as a group collectively on how to improve that for the future to make it work more with the FAIR principles of being able to deliver data based on common vocabularies. It's not there, but that's future plans. Anyway, so the FAIR data principles not only apply to humans, but also importantly to machine searches to be able to hit APIs such as that of the Food Data Central, or to be able to reuse terminology from existing vocabularies like food on and institutional vocabularies together. All right, so one of the ways in which the FAIR principles are often actually implemented in practice, there are a variety of ways, but one of the common ways is through the use of what we call minimum information standards. Minimum information standards are sets of guidelines and formats for the reporting of scientific data. So it literally provides a structured format by which data of a certain type can and should be reported for a particular domain, which concerns, specific people in a field for a specific type of study. And the idea is that really you want to structure your data and you want to have a tool of making it so that your data is structured. You also want to ensure with this structure that data can be verified, analyzed, interpreted, brought together, and managed using standard practices and methods. And finally, the idea of an information standard, a minimum information standard, is that it can allow for multiple data sets to be used together to mine across different data sets to try and come up with answers to more complicated problems by having our data all in the same common format. And so within the life sciences, there have been extensive use of minimum information standards. Many have been developed, often by groups of people who just kind of took it upon themselves to try and make it happen. There are many examples. For example, the plant phenotype, the plant phenomics standard, MyAPI, as well as the MIX-S standard for genomics, minimum information about any X sequence. There are many, many more, and these have really been helpful in making sure that data from these various fields are made reusable. And some of them have even been adopted by community repositories and journals to really help facilitate the mining of data across different data sets and the reuse of data. And so the point of the talk today is really to talk about this idea. I've hopefully laid the stage for you all about the need to create a new minimum information standard for food composition data, which I'm going to refer from now on to as the MyFC standard, the minimum information about any food composition data standard, or MyFC. So what is it that we might be looking for to come out of such a standard like MyFC? Well, first and foremost, we want to enable food composition data to be fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. We want to make sure that we actually provide a product that others can and want to use that will lead us toward the goal of making food composition data fair, in line with the FAIR principles, to be able to improve the data ecosystem around food composition data such that we can actually get to that ideal of having machine searches through interoperable vocabularies that we can all use together to query each other's data and to learn from each other. So what are some of the things that we would want to have from this data standard? Well, first of all, we need our data to be standardized. Hence the idea of and the need for a minimum information standard, literally a way in which data should be put or could or should be put into a standard format with things to tell you what is expected where, what is required, what isn't, etc. And this can really help to do a variety of things. This can help to comprehensively annotate our food composition data, do it in a way where we do it in a way that everyone agrees, but also that we can agree to have more complicated annotations together to get at the various environment, management, production, etc. Facets that we might want to be able to search our food by. This is also a way of ensuring transparency. For institutional purposes, like at the USDA, the concern is often, to make data transparent. There's a mandate to do so. And so having tools and standards to do that will always help with data transparency. They're doing a good job at the moment, but, things can always be improved. Some other things that, we might want to take advantage of are the, modern technologies that allow for convertibility between formats. At the moment, many food composition data tables tend to be kind of an Excel tabular type data, but developers and websites, they tend to prefer formats like JSON or other things like that, which require a bit of conversion. So it might be good to have a standard that already has features like that built in that allow for convertibility between the common formats that the data producers and consumers and agents working in the middle might be able to transfer between and facilitate the exchange of data. Right, which leads to the next point, of course, is we want to facilitate the exchange of data between stakeholders. We want to lower the barrier of adoption to make it adaptable and make it easy for people to be able to share their data with one another or pull it from multiple sources. We also recognize that there are existing other standards or things that behave like standards that exist. And it's up to all of us as a community to really work together to harmonize these things, to come up with bridges between our standards so that we're working toward common harmonization and not just creating more standards in abundance. We want to be working towards harmonization of our standards instead of having too many that diverge. Okay, so those are kind of like the higher level goals and outcomes of what we're hoping to be able to accomplish from a product like this. So some of the challenges that we would address, that we would anticipate needing to be addressed within the MyFC standard? Well, things would need to be decided, such as what data are minimally required, as in what minimum elements within a food composition table are required. Things like a food identifier ID, a food description, a component identifier, a component description, those kinds of things. What is really the minimal set of things that have to be there for it to be a valid food composition table, and what other elements might be optional but not required. Another thing that we might want to discuss in this work would be to provide clear, succinct definitions for what is meant by foods and components of nutritional interest. Does this include, toxic compounds as well as just nutritional compounds? Further, and of course, people here are probably familiar with food on or other similar vocabularies. We want to make sure that emerging standards like this would make use of, existing data standards by which to annotate data. So to make use of terminology from vocabularies like the food ontology, the European Food Safety Authority's Food X2 vocabulary, et cetera, to be able to annotate the terminology for their foods, components, or other facets within the larger standard. Another thing that the standard would aim to do is to help to clarify approaches for data reporting. So what does this mean? This means really, really be clear at a granular level, at a granular data level, what was measured, what compound was measured, what kind of vocabulary can we use to specify how the compound was measured, what were the units the compound was measured in, what were the protocols, what were the measurement devices, what were the URLs to the protocol that might have been used, was there an AOAC method? All of those types of things we want to be really clear and kind of like force, in a good way, force that to all be within the standards so that people can decide what data are valid for comparison and which aren't for their own purposes. And finally, another kind of broader goal of the development of such a standard would be to enumerate lists of other metadata attributes which might not be required, but might be commonly collected within food composition tables or similar studies, or might be desired for similar types of science that are making use of food composition data. And standardizing those types of fields could lead to future discoveries where people, have this metadata at hand and they could better search for it and make new discoveries in the future. So we want to really be able to set up a food composition standard that enables better science in the future. And the way to start with that is to standardize what our data look like literally what the data look like. So just a really brief example, won't go too much over this. These are just for illustrative purposes. It's a mix of data from USDA, but basically really hammer home the idea that, within a standard, you want to be really clear about what components were measured, the vocabularies that's being used for that, the descriptions of those components, the units, using some standard systems, such as using existing unit standardization systems, be really clear about what methods were used, protocol DOIs, et cetera. Just kind of a high-level overview of what we're talking about. MyFC could also potentially serve as a bridge between existing systems. So this slide is a little bit new, but basically I want to stress the idea that, because there are many different component systems, those employed by the USDA, those employed by Eurofer, the European Food Informatics Resource Group, they have their own component thesaurus. There are open source component vocabularies, such as the compositional dietary nutrition ontology, and more. So we want to, make sure that this system is aware of those things which exist and are already being used by others in order to bring together our data rather than to continue have it siloed across different countries and institutions. Similarly, in terms of methods to help to bridge the gap between existing organizations such as AOAC, the European Committee for Standardization, CEN, and that which is done by the UN Food and Agricultural Organization, the UNFAO. And just like kind of a little shout out to the FAO here. I thought I saw Fernanda earlier. I'm not sure if you're still here, but we really want to, try to have the standard also work with existing systems from the UN FAO and, to bridge to not only the vocabularies I mentioned above, but also to things like the in-foods component tag names, which are kind of like a mix between the component type and the measurement method in one identifier. So finding ways to have this standard bridge to existing systems like that makes all of our data stronger and all of our data more accessible and connected to one another. So just a little bit about the future directions, the impacts that we're hoping that the MyFC standard could have at USDA on the Food Data Central website and database would be a future plan of using the MyFC standard to standardize and integrate USDA data sets. So we would take the existing USDA data sets, standardize and integrate them using MyFC, which would allow us to have data that could be better used together than it is currently, more integratable than it is currently on the website, as that's one of the challenges we face at FDC. This would involve doing things like machine validation of the standard compliance, to check if, something that's specified as a string or, words is actually not, a number or an integer, doing machine validation of things to make sure that the data is as the standard describes it to be. And this would allow us to have, standard MyFC standard compliant data sets, which could then be loaded into a future version of the Food Data Central website, which would enable advanced search capabilities on things like the additional facet types that we mentioned based on, things like genetics, environment processing, what types of, was the food stabilized, was it organic, et cetera. And it could also enable future searches using vocabularies like the food ontology in the future, perhaps, based on mapping work that's been done, and that I'm hoping that the development of the standard will continue to facilitate. And finally, the standard could enable the integration of either data relevant to FDC to be allowed to be into FDC, or for people to be able to combine their data with FDC data in a more streamlined and automated way. So in terms of a bit of the general impact that we're hoping to be able to have with MyFC, beyond just Food Data Central itself, we're hoping that the standardized format of MyFC might be able to serve a variety of stakeholder needs, be they, data producers, data consumers, or someone in between. We want to have the standard be able to enable the exchange of data between collaborators. We want to lower the bar for the standard. We want to make sure that it's as easy to use as possible so that people are interested in using it and not just continue business as usual of not having our data connected. And we also hope that the standard could do things like facilitate workflows for food composition database compilers who might already be compiling data from various different sources, such as different countries' food composition tables. If, for example, the different countries that these data compilers were compiling from made use of the same standard, it would greatly facilitate that work that food composition data compilers currently have to do. And so in order to be able to do this, we are hoping to be able to soon launch an international working group. We still haven't done so yet, but we're hoping that this can be done as soon as possible once we get over some bureaucratic challenges. And we will be able to launch an international working group to be able to elicit feedback from experts such as the people on this call or others. And we really want to do this because this can ensure that the standard development is done in an open and transparent way. It's not just dictated by one particular agency or a set of agencies, but rather be open and, adaptable to feedback from researchers and other stakeholders who might be interested in using the standard or contributing to it in the future. So in summary, at a very high level, we discussed the idea of a minimum information standard, what it is, and how it can help to enable the sharing and integration of data. We discussed the idea that Food Composition Data Central, that FDC, the USDA's Food Data Central, is working on creating a minimum information standard for food composition data, the MyFC standard. And really the idea of the standard is to work toward making food composition data fair and having a way that we can harmonize our own data and harmonize it within USDA, but also make it a general purpose tool that others can use for other purposes as well. Doing so, we absolutely have ran into and anticipate that there are many challenges. And as such, we would like to, as soon as possible, begin getting people's feedback and help to create this or improve upon the working draft of the MyFC standard as part of an international working group, which can really help to discuss and refine the content of the prototype standard. And so I'd like to say, as soon as possible, we will be opening this up, hopefully to as many people as possible for an international working group to get your participation. So that'll be coming soon, and I'm really looking forward to continued discussions with many people such as those on this call. That's all for the very high level. I'm happy to take questions, and I think Damien has a nice follow-up presentation that he'll give that might talk about some more of the details I wasn't able to get to, but might elucidate further steps for how this all could work together. So thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah, wonderful, Kai. Yes, I open up the floor to questions from people about MIFC as it's envisioned within USDA and beyond. Okay, first off, Bernd, you're on mute at the moment.
Hello.
Hi, we hear you.
Given your background with ontologies, I didn't hear any mentioning of the term ontology in your talk, so I wonder what the relationship is going to be.
Yeah, so I didn't mention explicitly ontologies, but I did mention it sort of in passing. So within the food composition data, there would be places that would make use of existing vocabularies or ontologies. So for example, for components measured, one could use the existing the existing component vocabulary from USDA, from Eurofer, or an open source ontology like the CDNO. Similarly, for foods, one could use an open source ontology like Foodon. All of that is kind of intended to be built into the standard and kind of help to map a bridge between institutional vocabularies. So work has already been done with Foodon to help map it to the USDA's food vocabulary. And this is really something that we're hoping to be able to act as a bridge to other institutions. So if other institutions beyond USDA also want to map to USDA, then they can make use of an open source project or ontology like Foodon to make those mappings possible. So for example, if the like the FDA or agencies, nutritional agencies within Europe, the European Food Safety Agency, et cetera, if they wanted to, help get on this train, we could make use of ontologies to map between standards. So that's how it's built in. Sorry, I didn't get too deep into it. This is a really big picture talk, but yes, ontologies would definitely play a big part in the standard. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to offer a little bit of discussion, if I have time, around the technical platform on which the standard will be offered, called LinkML, and that's where we can get a bit more into the ontology talk. Okay, next up, I see Magali, hand raised.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Kai. It was wonderful and so nice to see you again. And just my question to, as Bernd mentioned, so you explained that we'll propose a minimum information structure, let's say the list of all the different kind of information, and then you are explaining that we can use any vocabularies as you want to map. So the purpose to map, or is the purpose to propose the general framework, or both? I don't
Yeah, both.
really
That's,
get
that's a really good question. So I put this slide up as just an example. So for the components, at the moment, we're envisioning that the standard would make use of USDA's component vocabulary, hopefully the Eurofur component vocabulary, the open source CDNO ontologies components, maybe KEBI, another chemicals ontology. And if anyone else in the community had another vocabulary or ontology that they wanted to add, they could help us work on making those mappings to make it possible to use that standard as well, with that
Yes, because-
vocabulary as well
Yes,
within the standard.
as you know, I am very interested in the mapping between Foodx2 and Foodon and also others. So I think I will be interested to participate in.
Yeah, that would be really, as soon as we're able to host those meetings, I'd be super happy to have you. And I would really love to have someone like you who's helping to facilitate mappings to the European Food Safety Agency's EFSA2. That's a really important vocabulary.
But
used
yes, and
all-
so as Damien mentioned, it is technically to be done. We have to arrange things to make it possible. But yes,
Yeah.
definitely it will be great.
Thank you.
And Kai, I presume when you're when this working group gets rolling, that every aspect of this MIFC spec will be discussed
Yes.
to sort of encourage multi-agency use, and that can come down to the field names and the included pieces around sampling strategy and so on. So we dropped a link to the GitHub repo, which is sort of an alpha of it all. I'm not expecting that we get a tour of it, but are you encouraging people to sort of go take a look at the scope of the thing?
I would love to get feedback on it. Again, that version is simply my first pass at this, and is not reflective of this being a USDA product at the moment. So as I said, I'd like to get feedback as soon as possible. We're waiting for the working group. If anyone wants to just have a look and give feedback, that would be appreciated from me. But know that the official version of this will be coming soon.
Okay. I'll just squeeze in that what I've observed is that MIFC, the spec, fits well with the USDA's needs, as one would expect, having it initiated as an alpha by you, but other agencies could well expect to shape it as to their needs. Handy.
That would be my hope moving forward, and depending on USDA's feedback, then we'll hopefully be able to do that.
Right.
No, absolutely. Hi, everyone. It's good to see you all again. And thank you very much, Kai, for this work and continuing what we've started a couple of years ago. And I'm wondering, kind of going back to the multi-agency questions, that are you working actively with at least the Office of Dietary Supplements and the FDA, who may be, looking at the regulatory sides of these things a little bit more to kind of ensure that you're aligning your efforts with them? Because there are, I think, some standards in chemical composition components when you're just solely looking at chemicals without the food component. So I'm just wondering, I know that you're really hoping that the other agencies will hop on, but I'm also wondering if you're thinking about foods that are not, or things that are considered food that are not in the FTC's databases.
Yeah, so the very good question. Thanks, Handy. Nice to see you as well. So yes, the original scope for this has definitely been first and foremost USDA's needs, but I'm hoping that this can be something that other agencies jump onto. We're having some discussions with FDA. And of course, the group that I work for, FHPEL, has also had discussions with Office of Nutritional Supplements. Maybe Kyle can speak more to that. Kyle, do you want to go ahead and answer that, or do you want to jump in?
Yeah. Hi, for those who don't know me, I'm the lead on USDA's Food Data Central. Hyundai, good to see you again. Yeah, I think overall USDA is actively engaged with federal stakeholders around anything around food composition, which includes discussions around dietary supplements. And so those conversations are always ongoing about how we can be interoperable. not just through this checklist. Hopefully this checklist creates this, but both on interoperability for databases in general. So those conversations with NIH, with FDA are always ongoing with the USDA.
So very happy to see that. Great.
Great. And any other questions from the floor? Fernanda.
Hi, hello. Hi, Kai. Nice to see you again. I want to congratulate you once again for this huge work. I know that it will be very challenging to put together all the existing standards and guidelines to come up with this minimum minimum information standards. So this work is very much appreciated, I think, for all people working with food composition data. What I wanted to check with you to ask is if you have in this first draft that you were preparing, if you have considered the FAO in Foods evaluation framework for published food composition tables. I know that the purpose is a bit different because the framework is to evaluate not every single value in a food composition table, but rather the food composition table as a whole. But I think that it can give you some important insights on the information that is needed at different levels for food description, component description, and etc. So I'm sure we will have opportunities to discuss this in the working group as well, but I just wanted to highlight this.
Thanks, Fernanda. Yeah, really nice to see you again. We definitely are thinking about that. And we even have a student, Emily Stilios, who we hired on an innovation fund, who's specifically looking into that. So we have specifically someone working using funding from associated with this project to help be the liaison to FAO. I'd love to introduce you to her as soon as I get a chance to do so. And we want to hopefully make this work and bring in FAO and deal with all of your amazing work that you guys have been doing over there. So thank you very much.
Yeah, that kind of raises the point that a standard ends up having this tension about figuring out where its boundary is. And most standards are really just cherry-picked datums from complex processes. And so this standard around food composition is latching onto all of the analytic processes happening. But in terms of where the food came from, it's sort of leaving that to be second-class objects that aren't really modeled. They're just like, where did we buy the food? What's the collection? Is this a collection of samples that the analytics has yielded results on? So in the end, this may spawn a bunch of neighboring standards as well, each of which focuses on a first-class object, as they call it, something that needs to be the focus of modeling, and then touching on different standards, neighboring standards. So perhaps that's a good segue. If there are no other questions, let's see, chat. Yeah. That could be a segue into me talking about LinkML for 5 or 10 minutes as the platform for describing standards and why Kai was motivated to try this out. So I will open up my sharing to desktop. Let's see. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So this is taken from another presentation I did recently, and it's to kind of describe the technical stack that standards publishing can be backed up by. So, and I will just make allusions to the MIFC and some other standards that are operating using this kind of tech stack right now. this is a tech stack that we ourselves use at Citgo, and the LinkML part takes us halfway to the whole stack. You'll just get a glimpse of a few tools that happen later on after the standard is established. So GitHub is being used right now as an attractive place to host these standards and incrementally update their files and version them, give version identifiers, and allow public downloading at any point in time. LinkML as a nice little publishing framework for hosting your standard on GitHub by enabling not just the document or the text file that technically goes through and supplies all of the bits and pieces for the standard, but also a documentation platform that allows the relationships within anything greater than a flat table to be shown so that you can actually navigate through the parts. So we'll see a glimpse of that. And then I'll just show a little bit about Data Harmonizer. But the focus, yeah, so first of all, this is just a slide about GitHub and some of the benefits around versioning and getting access to files. And it's showing a GitHub repo where our standard for pathogen genomics is, and half our lab is involved in the biomedical side. So this package of standards, of different standards that are focused on particular viruses or bacteria allows people to go see and download each of those in a package. Enough said about that. So focusing on LinkML, it is a specification language for describing data from a data source that isn't necessarily just tabular, can be relational data from like an SQL database or other structured data, and as well graph data, graph-based. So it's trying to traverse this world between the way most agencies actually use information in their tabular databases over to the future possibilities with graph data. It's been around for a number of years and supported by the US Department of Energy. You can see a big bioinformatics emphasis over on a number of the projects, but also environment, National Microbiome Data Collaborative, and other projects. Over 600, it's used in over 600 GitHub projects. So people have cottoned on to the idea that this is an elegant way to express their standards. So the nuts and bolts of the framework are that for any data schema, and that includes expression of standards, you can have these classes, which essentially define all the columns of a table. So some of the slides that Kai was showing of the data with the table headers, that's what a class describes. The slots are the individual columns, headers of a table. And then the enumerations are the pick lists that you can put inside them. And so that lines up really well when you're trying to make a standard. And it's a spreadsheet data entry kind of interface that people are using. And the enumerations and the slots can be reused in any of these classes or standard tables. And that allows you to have a general standard and then specialize that standard into specific use cases for your own agencies. So that one of the attractive things about LinkML is that it allows general fields to be defined, but then you can, from your own use case, add or change the pick lists involved or the features of the labeling or the description while conforming to a standard at large. So this translates into a tabular view where fields can be marked as required or optional, and the pull-down lists themselves can be automatically generated in your applications from the specification or the standard. And here we get a little bit of a taste of using LinkML as platform for describing these pick lists without necessarily committing to ontologies, because a lot of time ontology is still catching up to where particular agencies are in the vocabulary, and that vocabulary has to be developed. So you can create a specification with all of your pick list choices and then go and ask the ontology team to add ontology IDs over time to cover these for exposure of your data off to external sources. This is a slide that just gives you a snapshot of the ability within LinkML to do databasey kind of inheritance of characteristics in these specifications or tabular data representations. So as I was just saying, you can customize a specification or standard towards your own use case. And there are some side benefits to LinkML that are coming up, multilingual interfaces, not just for, in our case, a tool called Data Harmonizer that lets you look at a LinkML spec in tabular form, but also the content can be multilingual, and that's probably of appeal to our European and other international partners. Certainly it's been useful in Canada. And so this is in a snapshot of a LinkML specification here for signs and symptoms. Can relate to foodborne pathogen diseases and or other kinds of disease. And you're just getting a list of all of the permissible values in this pick list. And then ontology just starts showing up where if you want to guarantee that some other database is using exactly the same term, we get to add a little meaning attribute and point to the ontology ID that's unique for that concept. So there's other things coming, the ability to edit these schemas or standards directly in a tabular spreadsheet view, and the documentation support, which you'll see on the GitHub site that Kai has created for this alpha, shows the way that you can drill down into, in this case, food component and provenance and the different fields that are involved in each of those things. So that's the last thing to say is, yeah, this whole platform has been tested out with other standards like the MIXIS standard for any genomic sequence, and the Genomic Standards Consortium supported that. That's another place you can go to sort of check out the documentation and field level specification, power prowess of this LinkML platform. I think that's about it for what I had to say there.
Thanks, Damien.
Does that
help? Very helpful. Thank you, Damien. Does anyone have questions for Damien?
Right. Thanks, Andy. Yeah, I guess maybe I just finished by saying, so often when the ontologists come and try to talk to agencies about how they're going to ontologize their data, well, the agencies are actually quite comfortable working with their data in tabular form, not in graph database form. They're kind of curious about what the querying power might be with graph database representations. So one thing I didn't show was that LinkML, while providing all of the tabular column, field, pick list kind of level detail, and offering the capacity to drive some of those pick lists from ontologies directly through like lookup tools, which they're still under development. The other thing that it allows is adding scripts to convert the tabular view of your information to a knowledge graph view. And that allows ontology people to work on that problem and say, hey, here, you can now query your data in a much more interrelated way that allows different graphs from other people producing information along the same data structure to just bring in those graph databases and run a querying engine rather than the more traditional SQL data translation, relational database data translation thing where you have to insert records into tables and hope that all of the adjacent record references are also coming in and so on. So it's marrying for agencies the ability to understand tabular data coming into their organization or being exported better, and then the potential around ontology development and knowledge graph interoperability. Handy.
Hello again. When you talked about the querying power, it brought to my mind that there is now a lot of interest in a lot of different places for large language model integration for some of these ontologies. And me and my lab, we've been kind of looking at this and working and playing around with this for a while now. And we're looking into improving some of these capabilities. I'm wondering if there is an interest in working towards those goals within the group as well.
Yeah, I can say I'll put in one more. Chip, I'd love to see what you're up to, Andy. It would be a great presentation around that, especially I presume you've got an interest in ontology there, so trying to feed in as much. The LinkML Community Monarch Initiative, Chris Mongel's group has also been very interested in using LLM ChatGPT, or they have a tool, OntoGPT, to map free text and other possibly more structured data into LinkML specification data sets for like a food recipe record or an environmental sample. And so that's reasonably working. And of course, we're still trying to figure out which way LLMs might make us look stupid if we rely on them 100%, but the results are pretty good. So I expect between what you're doing and what they're doing and some other people, that would be a great thing to present on. And yeah. Kai.
Kyle, he's got.
Kyle, right?
That's right. We get it all the time. My question is around there's a lot of benefit I can see from LinkML with things like pick lists that potentially reduce input error and facilitate making sure that when you're going through LinkML, things are formatted correctly. Does LinkML, facilitate error checking, and to what level? Is it just on making sure you have the right data formats, or does it include, or should it include, other things like knowing for this particular I'm given a really easy example that we run into in food composition tables. You have a proximate a macronutrient that's higher than your serving size. So you're claiming I have 200 grams of protein for every 100 gram. Like, that's an obvious error. Where there's unobvious errors that we know in a nutrition community, when you look at something and can look at a nutrient and know it's wrong. So what is LinkML's responsibility here, and how do you use it? And what's the appropriate use of it potentially now and in the future?
Mm-hmm. I can take a stab at that one. I know, Kai, you've worked a fair bit with LinkML. I've played around with the validation, and it's got command line tools for validating all the fields in the pick lists. It's a bit more complex to validate a pick list that has its specification set to some ontology term branch out on the web. So there's still custom code required to do that kind of thing. But as long as the standard contains the pick lists, it is quite happy to validate not just single pull downs, but multi-select lists, as well as numeric fields and dates. The more complex question of, can you put in rules to have one field required if another one is left empty, and so on? It has that as well, a rule engine. I think the edges of that capability are still being tested. So, for example, can you set an upper or lower limit on another field based on one field's numeric content? I'm not sure exactly where the limits of that are.
It's a community developed project though, so if people asked for that feature, it's possible they could implement it. Not guaranteed, but there's a whole group of people, like he mentioned at Chris's lab, but others, many others of DOE funded and others who are working on things like that. So it could be possible in the future.
Mm-hmm. They have things like calculated fields. You can force one field to have a certain value based on another. And then that gets validated if somebody put in a different result or something like that as well.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, the validation on data type is more mature than, say, the other types of error checking that you might integrate into that platform at this time.
Yeah,
it's more one-to-one. It's more like these are the rules for that one slot, be it this list or this constraint, but not necessarily between two slots. But that's a little bit harder to do at the moment.
Yeah, they do required. I've seen ability to flip field requirements based on contents of other fields. So the sort of data entry part, I think, is covered pretty well. The kind of needs you would need on a form to block or show enable fields, at least the instructions to do so to an application. But yeah, there's still some things the rules can't express, as I recall.
Thanks.
Yes, so I can say we've been excited to use it on our data harmonizer, a data validation tool, where tons of COVID data has gone in and out to third-party repositories for storage. And I'm expecting to support the MIFC specification fully, such that we can offer not only ontology IDs backing up each of the MIFC menus and columns and so on, but as well, the data harmonizer will be able to run right off of it. So you'll get a tabular interface to edit food composition if you want to. But the nice thing about LinkML is that it's meant to be a specification that all sorts of applications can use. Okay, we're coming up towards the end. I'd like to say that we have a couple of work groups. First of all, to talk about the monthly call. We like to have a monthly call and we like to have topics for it. So Handy, you've kind of suggested one that might show up next. And so let's have a little dialogue about that. As well, there's a food on curation meeting that happens, and we're going to start that up as well, and that's every couple of weeks. And we're looking towards things like training related to the periodic table of food initiative and the terms they like. We're going to be helping a few people out there. We're talking about a food characteristics paper, which ultimately is fleshed out to back up this MIFC standard. And the development sort of feedback discussion about MIFC could get started as well with a peek at the GitHub version of MIFC on the food on discussion list. So there are opportunities to get involved at two levels, once on a monthly, like this one, and then also a bi-weekly. So with that said, anybody who wants to follow up with me, Dane, you got my email, and welcome to, I hope to see you again in a month. Any other comments or events, notices, things to be aware of for the group? Nope. Okay, good. We'll set something up for a month from now, and salute.
Thanks, Damien. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thank you, Kai. This was great. See y'all. Damien, do you have a minute after this?
Yeah,
Just
sure.
briefly sync. Okay, perfect. I'll stay on that.
Yeah.
All right, take care. Thanks again, Damien.
Yeah, you bet, Kai. Thanks so much. It was great.
Yeah, that was really helpful. Thank you.
Mhm.
You might want
Congrats.
to end the recording.
Oh
Oh, yeah.
yeah, that.
Catch.